gets up and walks away from the booth and walks as if he's going towards the bathroom, but then stops, doesn't go to the bathroom, turns around and walks back towards the front of the building, and then walks out the front doors, just leaves the restaurant altogether. Now, it's unclear if the rest of his family saw him do this. It doesn't seem like they did, but just a minute later, Austin comes back inside the restaurant and just walks right back to his table and sits down like nothing had ever happened. Less than 10 minutes later, Austin would get up again from his table. Instead of going to the bathroom, he just walks straight from his table, right out the front doors of the restaurant, and disappears. A couple minutes later, Austin's mother, who was not at dinner with them, she was at her home, which happened to be nearby this restaurant. She was home when she heard the sound of someone coming into her house. And so she went around to see who it was, and she found her son, Austin, in her kitchen, drinking vegetable oil, and there was Parmesan cheese all over the counter that apparently he had been eating as well. And so she runs up to him and she grabs the vegetable oil and she puts it down and she tells him to stop, at which point Austin does stop. And then I guess Austin just went up to his room and he changed out of his clothes because perhaps he got oil all over his shirt, and then his mom just drove him back to the restaurant. So she watched him get out of the car and she watched him go through the front door, and then she drove off. And so about 30 minutes after he left that second time, Austin walks through the front doors of the restaurant. He's got a different shirt on, different hat on, and he just walks to the back of the restaurant where friend, his father, and his father's girlfriend are, and he sits down like nothing had ever happened. At first, it looks like everyone at the table is just silent. But then Austin's father clearly said something to Austin, and it seems kind of hostile. And it would turn out Austin's father, who loved his son, was just totally at a loss for what to do with him, and he said to Austin when he sat back down, "What is wrong with you?" And at this, Austin just stands up and presses his father's face back up against his seat, kind of pinning him there. And then at some point, he just lets go, he leaves the booth, and he walks right out of the restaurant for a third time. Austin's friend, who was eating with them, he got up and kind of chased after Austin, about 30 seconds behind him, and so by the time he got outside, he didn't know where Austin went, and so he quickly came back in the restaurant.
What
he told
in
the rest of the group he didn't know where Austin was, and so at this point,
It's probably playing the video game, but that is the weirdest crap I've ever seen in my life. How much does this cost? And my back is killing me. That doesn't give you bucks, so no thank you. But then again, nah. Going fully black with these skins I don't think is actually all that cool. I'd get this though.
Father's girlfriend would actually call the police and report Austin missing. They knew he was totally unhinged and they didn't know where he was going to go, if he was a threat to himself or someone else, and so they figured they should just tell the police and have the police go find him. About 4 miles away from this restaurant, 53-year-old Michelle Mishcon was sitting in her garage watching TV. Normally, she would be joined by her husband, 59-year-old John Stevens, but he was out walking their dog, so for the time being, the couple had been married for roughly 20 years. They had 3 kids together from previous marriages, and they were just totally in love with each other. That garage was like their happy place. That was basically like their living room. They loved having the door wide open so they could wave to neighbors and flag people down to have a drink with them or just chat with them. They were just known to be a very happy, loving couple that were fun to be around. And according to their kids, they had both recently retired. John retired from his landscaping company that he owned, and Michelle retired from her financial advisory job, and the two of them were apparently both just really excited about retirement life. To spend more time, go out with their friends, and go out fishing on their boat with their dog, and then also spend as much time as they could just lounging back in their garage. John and Michelle's neighbor across the street was a middle-aged man named Jeff Fisher. Jeff was fairly close with the couple. He usually watched their dogs anytime they went away, and He would often go in their garage and have a drink and just kind of hang out with them. And so this particular night, he was over at his house, and he was going. So he laid down on his bed, he's getting ready to go to sleep.
You can't tell me this dude is about to murder them both.
Coming from outside his window across the street over near John and Michelle's property. And so Jeff sits up in his bed and kind of strains his ears to see what it was that he heard. And trying to listen for some faint sound, he suddenly hears a blood-curdling scream, a woman's scream, coming from across the street. And so Jeff instantly leapt into action. Instead, he ran downstairs, and he ran out his front door, and he looked across the street, and he saw this unknown man, a young man that was slamming the car door of Michelle's car that was parked in her driveway, and he begins walking up the driveway, and at the top of the driveway, Jeff sees Michelle is standing in the garage, and she looks totally terrified as she's facing this unknown young man. And of course, this unknown young man was Austin Hara. Now, Jeff had no idea what was actually going on. All he knew was he heard this scream, which was probably Michelle, and he's looking out there and he's seeing a situation that just doesn't look good. And so instinctively, he decided he would just run across the street and make sure Michelle was okay. And if he had to, he would confront this unknown man, Austin. So Jeff begins running across his property, trying to get across the street to Michelle, but before he could even get across the street, he's looking up and he can see this guy, Austin, has grabbed Michelle and thrown her on the ground, and now he's on top of her and he's beating her. And so Jeff runs onto the driveway, and as he's going right up the driveway between the two cars that were parked there, Austin leaps off of Michelle. He turns around, and he looks at Jeff, and he says, "You don't want a part of this." And now Jeff, he's a pretty big guy, and so he's looking at Austin, and he knows that if he doesn't do anything, this guy is just going to continue pummeling poor Michelle, and he had no idea where John was, and so he ran up and kind of lunged at Austin, and as he did that, Austin swung, and he hit Jeff right across the side of the head. But Jeff took the hit, he didn't fall down, he grabbed Austin by the collar and threw him as hard as he could to the ground, and Austin, he hit the pavement hard, face first. And so Jeff is looking at this guy, kind of thinking he's not going to get up. But as he's assessing the situation, watching Austin stand back up again, Jeff suddenly feels a blinding pain in his face, in the side of his head, in his neck, on his back, and he looks down and he sees blood all over his arms. It's everywhere. He's covered in blood. It would turn out Austin was carrying a knife. And so when he punched Jeff, the side of his head, it cut his neck, and it cut his back. He had 1. Jeff believed at the time that this was a potentially fatal wound. He worried perhaps his jugular had been struck. And seeing Austin stand back up, coming right after him with his knife, and so Jeff decides their only chance is for him to run. And so he runs into Michelle's property. Towards him, away from Michelle.
You keep joining me.
Slams into all their doors.
I don't fucking know you.
Around the property, and then he makes a run for it straight across the street to his house. Never once did he turn around to see if this guy was after him. He figured he was right. Perhaps his jugular had been struck and he was bleeding. He's seeing Austin stand back up, coming right after him with this knife, and so Jeff decides their only chance is for him to run and call the police. And so he runs into Michelle's property. He's thinking that he's kind of drawing this guy towards him, away from Michelle. He runs into their property, kind of slams into all their doors. He goes out a back door, and then he loops around the property, and then he makes a run for it straight across the street to his house. Never once did he turn around to see if this guy was after him. He figured he was right behind him. He gets to his house, he runs inside, he locks the door, and then he calls 911.
Please, a medical. Young man beating up a woman across the street.
Are either of them injured? Can you tell from where you are?
Yes, there's a girl laying on the ground. He beat her up. I ran over there. I'm bleeding profusely here at the moment.
Okay.
I don't know what happened.
Can you tell if she's conscious?
No, it does not appear so, no. I've been stabbed in the back. I'm bleeding pretty bad.
After the call is placed and Jeff is certain that help is on the way, he's barely conscious, but all he can remember thinking was, I hope this maniac, Austin, has abandoned his attack and just run off. Or, I hope John has come outside and he's helping his wife. But unfortunately, all Jeff could hear was the sound of Austin across the street making these loud, animalistic grunting sounds, and at the same time, he hears the sound of someone screaming at the top of his lungs. He doesn't even know if it's one person, if it's two people, if it's male, if it's female, all he hears is screams and grunting sounds. And then seconds show up. The following narrative is the account of the second responding officer, who we'll just call Dan, and the first responding officer we'll just call Kristen. And so Dan, he comes flying down the street, he's got his sirens on, and he pulls in right behind Kristen's cop car, which is parked right out front of John and Michelle's property. Kristen is already running up the driveway, her gun is out, she's getting ready to engage somebody at the top of the driveway. And so Dan, he pops out of his car, he's got his hand on his gun, and as he turns to run up the driveway, his view is obscured. There are two cars parked in the driveway, and so he can't see what's at the top of the driveway that Kristen is apparently getting ready to draw her gun on. But as he begins running up the driveway, he sees there is this massive 6-foot-wide stream of blood just coming down the driveway. So he goes around the left side of the left car, he goes up, and he sees Kristen right at the top of the driveway. She's got her gun aimed at the ground right in front of the car, so he can't see what's in front of the car yet. He comes bombing around the left side right behind Kristen, and he looks down at what she's aiming her gun at, and he sees there's this man lying on the ground, his eyes are open, he's just laying there kind of stiff. He's looking up at Kristen and he's looking up at Dan, and he's just finally saying, "Please help me." The man on the ground was John Stevens, and on top of John Stevens was Austin. He was kind of laying sideways on John's chest. He had his left arm wrapped around John's neck to kind of hold him in place, and then he had his right arm and he was doing something to John's face. But Dan couldn't really tell what he was doing. To take in was there was clearly an aggressor and they needed to get him off of the victim. But Kristen could not take the shot because if she did, she ran the risk of firing the bullet through Austin into John, killing John. And so Dan tells Kristen, "Hold on, I'm going to tase him." And so he moves around Kristen to her left side, so he's positioned looking down at the back of Austin. He pulls out his taser right before
Are you serious right now?
Austin is doing to John's face. With his free right hand, he was reaching into John's mouth and pulling his cheek out, kind of like a fish hook. He's pulling it out as far as he could, and then he was biting into John's cheek, and he was ripping out pieces of flesh and chewing and swallowing them. And from Dan only saw this for a second, but he suddenly noticed, and Kristen, the other officer, would later confirm, there were all these chunks already missing from John's face. He snapped out of what he was seeing and fired his taser into the back of Austin, but it did nothing. It had absolutely no effect. Was entirely focused on biting John's face. That was all he was doing. He wasn't even registering that there were cops with their guns drawn on him. It was like they weren't even there. And so Dan runs back around Kristen to the other side of her. He's now on her right side, so he's standing right next to the car, looking down at Austin's front. And he tells Kristen to up for a second, and then Dan winds up and kicks Austin square in the face, knocking his head off of John's face. But as soon as Austin comes off of John, he doesn't get up and try to fight with Dan. Instead, he just jumps back down, gets a deeper grip on John, and plunges his mouth back onto John's face. And so again, Dan winds up and boots Austin square in the face, knocking his head. Again, he's totally unfazed. He doesn't want to attack the officers. He just wants to eat John's face. And so he goes right back down, gets a tighter grip. He goes back and starts chewing on John's face again. And so Dan was just repeatedly kicking him in the face over and over and over again, right as another set of officers showed up, and they had a canine. They had a dog. And so they come flying up, they kind of see the situation, and Dan tells them, "Release the dog." And so sure enough, they release the down on Austin's right arm, the arm that was fish hooking and kind of pulling John's face out. And the dog really got a good bite on his arm and yanked it away from John's face. But Austin just instantly ripped his arm back, doing severe damage to his arm from the dog's teeth, and just repositioned himself and went back to biting John's face. And so the dog, just as it was trained, did another bite. It grabbed back onto Austin's arm and it pulled it off of John's body, and so his arm is back like this again, and Austin, again, unfazed, just yanked his arm out of the dog's teeth, again shredding the muscles of his arm, and gets back in position and continues to eat John's face.
Are you serious? Why the hell are y'all landing here?
And this time when the dog managed to yank Austin's arm
Look at that.
away,
Look at that. What a weirdo.
he timed it so he booted Austin square in the face right as his arm was being pulled back, and he hit him hard enough that Austin actually flew off of John and landed on his back. And as soon as he was on the ground, Dan actually leapt over John and landed on Austin's face, smashing his head into the cement, which kind of stunned him for a second. And as soon as he was stunned, Dan whipped out his handcuffs, threw it over one of Austin's wrists, and began pulling him by the handcuffs up the driveway away from John. But as soon as he had some separation and Dan went to put his other handcuff on Austin began fighting back, and he looked up at Dan and he screamed, "Kill me! I'm eating humans! Kill me!" Dan didn't even know what to do as he's trying to put the other handcuff on him the whole time. Austin is screaming, "Kill me! Kill me!" And the other officers had to run in, and then finally, after 3 other officers came over, they were able to hold Austin down long enough to get those handcuffs on him. After Austin was finally restrained, the officers checked on the victim. They checked on Michelle, who was in the garage, and unfortunately she was deceased. She died from blunt force trauma. And John, even though he had been alive when the police first showed up, he had succumbed to the multitude of injuries he had sustained, from stabbing to beatings to having a portion of his face ripped off. It's believed after John came back from his walk, which would have been right after Jeff had been attacked and ran back to his house, John saw Austin in his garage attacking his wife, and John ran in to try to save her. So ultimately John would die trying to save the woman that he loved. Their dog would survive the attack. It was unharmed, and it was given to one of their children to take care of. And Jeff Fisher, the neighbor who tried to save John and Michelle, he would survive the attack and make a full recovery. After Austin was finally handcuffed and was laying restrained on the driveway, he suddenly became unresponsive. He was rushed to the
Are you
hospital.
serious?
It was determined he had drank some poisonous chemicals, most likely from inside of John.
Nobody likes you.
And that was what was causing his organs to fail. Ultimately, Austin would go into a coma for 11 days from whatever he ingested. The doctors were able to save his life until he came out of
Dumb
the coma.
bitch, get shit on.
Physical recovery.
You are
It was
so annoying.
initially assumed that because of Austin's drug abuse history, that he must have been on some
You're
drug
fucking dance
when he
on, loser.
perpetrated this heinous crime. It was speculated that he could have been on bath salts or flakka, which are these synthetic hallucinogenic drugs, which are very powerful, and at the time they were quite popular in Florida, and they'd caused some other users to go on these kind of
I
wild,
like that
violent
stupid
rampages.
bitch.
So it seemed to make a lot of sense that he must have been on one of those. But when Austin's toxicology report finally came back, it showed he only had a very small amount of THC in his system, which is the drug found in marijuana, and then the other drugs that were in his system were all induced by the doctors and nurses at the hospital, which meant at the time of this attack, Austin was effectively sober. When the police asked Austin, "Why did you do this?" he initially said, "I don't remember, I don't know," but eventually he would open up and he would tell this story that no sane person could possibly understand. He said after he left that restaurant where his family was that third time, after he fought with his father and he stormed out, after that, he saw this dark figure outside with a white face, and he knew immediately that this figure was evil. And so instinctively, Austin began running away from this evil figure. And so he ran about 4 miles into John and Michelle's neighborhood. And when he got to this neighborhood, a neighborhood he was not familiar with, that he didn't intend to go to on purpose, he just kind of wound up there. He said he saw this brightly lit up garage, and he ran up into it, believing he could enlist the help of the people inside of the house, and that would help him defeat this evil figure that was lurking somewhere nearby. And so he runs up into this garage, which happens to be Michelle's garage, and Michelle is in there. John is not. He's out for the walk with his dog. And Austin approaches her and tries to get her to help him, but he probably came off looking completely insane, and Michelle screamed. At which point, Austin said he believed Michelle was a witch, and so he pulled out his knife and he attacked her. And then after she fell to the ground, Austin said he drank a bottle of alcohol or something, which we now know was most likely very poisonous lawn chemicals that was in the garage. After he drinks that bottle, he turns around, and now he's looking out of the garage towards the street. And he said he saw this other figure in the doorway with a dog next to him, and then Austin said his mind just went blank. It's believed the figure he saw in the doorway was John Stevens returning from his walk, but We don't know for sure, and frankly, this story is pretty incoherent to begin with, because it doesn't account for the fact that before John came back, Austin had been grappling with Jeff Fisher and stabbing Jeff Fisher, the neighbor. But Austin would say he has no recollection of encountering Jeff Fisher, he has no recollection of John or what he looked like, he certainly doesn't remember biting John's face, and he had no memory of any interactions with police. He said that basically he turned around, he said he figured his dog, and then his mind went blank. And then he woke up about 2 weeks later in the hospital. Now, when his story went public, a lot of people just were not willing to accept that story. They said he was making it up so he could plead insanity at his trial and get a lesser sentence. But a world-renowned forensic psychologist named Philip Resnick, who had worked on many high-profile cases before, he did a lengthy assessment of Austin, and he came to a very different conclusion than the public. In his 38-page report, Resnick points out the fact that Austin continued to bite John's face even when he was being openly threatened with being shot by the police officer standing right over him. He continued to bite John's face after he was tased. He continued to bite John's face after he was hit in the head repeatedly. He continued to bite John's face after his dog repeatedly bit him. This all suggests that Austin was truly in a psychotic state when this happened. The same person, even under the influence of drugs, will retain a basic survival instinct. They will try to protect themselves. So when there are guns pointed at them, or they're being physically harmed, or there's threats of violence, they'll do things to protect themselves. But Austin, it was like he had no idea about anything else except John's face. Resnick specified that the type of psychotic episode that Austin was suffering from on the night of the attack is something called clinical lycanthropy delusion. Clinical lycanthropy is a very rare occurrence where an individual believes they are no longer human. And almost always what they believe they are is something akin to a werewolf. And in Austin's case, it's not that hard to figure out why he might reach that type of conclusion. He had told his sister that he was using his passport, and then on a couple other occasions he had told some other friends that he was acting off. And then of course, on the night of the attack, after he killed Michelle, he pounced literally on John and began eating his face while making those loud animalistic grunting sounds. This is behavior that is certainly on par with what you would expect a werewolf to do in a movie. But this was not a movie, this was real life. After Austin came out of his coma, but before he had been transferred to jail, he agreed to do an interview with the clinical psychologist, TV personality Phil McGraw, better known as Dr. Phil. And during their 10-minute Zoom, Austin would break down and cry and say he was incredibly sorry to the family of the victims. He didn't really know why it happened, and that clearly there was something wrong with him and he needed help, and he just hoped they could find it in their hearts to eventually forgive him. But it's unlikely the family of the victims are going to forgive him anytime soon, especially when you consider they came out in an interview and said, I hope Austin makes a full recovery from his coma, that he has no brain damage, that he is totally A-OK, so he is fully aware and lucid when they read him his sentence. A sentence they hope is the death penalty. As of right now, though, the family of the victim will just have to keep on waiting because Austin is still in jail awaiting trial. So that's going to do it, guys. If you got something out of this episode and you haven't done this already, please invite the like button to come with you there, accidentally spill honey on them, and then push them into the bear enclosure. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly 2 or 3 video uploads. We are now selling merchandise like flannels and hats and mugs and sweatshirts and all sorts of stuff. If you're interested, go to shopmrballin.com. If you want to learn about upcoming deals and promotions in our shop, go to our shop's Instagram page. The username is shopmrballin. If you want to get in touch with me, you can direct message me on Instagram or on Twitter. Username for both platforms is JohnBallin416. I also have a ton of content over on TikTok where my username is Wallin. We also have a second YouTube channel called Shorts, where we post random short videos and lost episodes. We also have a Facebook page just called Mr. Ballin, where we post condensed versions of the long episodes you see on YouTube. If you have a story suggestion, please submit it to our subreddit just called Mr. Ballin. It's linked in the description below. So whether I see you on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, Reddit, YouTube, Facebook, just know that I really appreciate your support. And until next time, that's going to do it. See you.
Liberty you're a fan of saving money on your insurance, this one you should know.
Liberty.
Whatever. I won't bother you if you don't bother me. Ooh, I should have probably kept those
Today marks a
names
very
though.
special milestone for the Lazy Masquerade channel. Exactly 1 year ago today, I uploaded my first ever horror narration video. I was just a Greek pastor and true horror story addict. And at that time, there weren't many of these types of horror story videos on YouTube.
Nah,
Wanting to try my hand at making
let's
my
listen
own
to
series.
Let's Read.
I-
Thank you very much. Let's Read. Amazing. Now I know what an urbex is.
My uncle touched his shoulder and he turned his head around and it was bright red. His eyes were bloodshot and his skin was starting to turn this
Maybe I could
weird
find
grayish
some
color.
music.
When they tried to ask him what was wrong, this weird gibberish that we later found out was Latin and was rocking in his chair back and forth. So he was known as kind of a prankster. So my uncle and cousin's husband, thinking he was playing around, he ordered him to stop and went to grab him out of the chair. When they touched him that time, he let out a loud scream again in what was Latin, and his eyes started to roll back to the back of his head. We were all freaking out at this point now. My cousin went and got a glass of water and he sleepwalking through it all. Just like this terrifying voice. My aunt was a pretty religious woman. She would do crosses, angel statues, and holy water in the house. So she ran back downstairs to get the holy water and listen to what it was meant. We realized there was weird things going on. My dad and uncle grabbed him out of the chair. He was kicking and trying to fight him the whole time. Now the police My aunt takes over the holy water and rubs it on her hand. My cousin pulls his shirt while he's being thrown down, and my aunt places her hand on his back. It starts to burn. He starts to burn while the exact size of her hand on his back. He screamed for a couple of seconds before he ended up passing out. I'm just standing there the whole time, absolutely terrified, not moving, and just kind of absorbing all of this happening. So, he passes out, but not knowing what to do, he called the police. Probably around 3 a.m. at this point. Please come with
Wow,
paramedics.
nice. You're so
Talk to
cool.
us all.
We're camping in a fucking garage. Look at you.
He's okay. He ended up waking up. They said that he was fine. Except for his burn wounds. Not knowing what to do, the police recommended Mrs. Warren a call since she was a famous paranormal investigator and lived right here in Connecticut. So nobody ends up going to bed at all, and me and my dad leave later in the morning. Now this next part I wasn't there for. About a week later, my aunt gives Mrs. Warren a call, tells her what happened and invites her to the house. Rain knew what the house was about before she even stepped foot in there. Apparently the newly built house was built on land that housed some kind of portal to the other dimension, as she put it. The little boy in my aunt's dream was trying to lead my aunt outside through the portal, because if a human entered the portal, it would be open enough for demons to constantly come and go through. From what Mrs. Warren was saying, apparently one got through and was able to possess my second cousin because he wasn't strong enough to fight it. Well, Lorraine ends up doing this whole seance operation and cleansing of the house to get rid of it all and close it permanently. And they end up living in that house for about another...
Repair IO equipment.
America faces a border crisis. President Biden launched the nation's immigration control.
think I'll go make me some pizza. Ah.
About another 8 years without any problems ever again before selling it and moving out of state. But I never
What the hell?
Again.
What are you doing here?
In details beyond what I was told, but that night still haunts me beyond belief. I grew up in an 8-bedroom farmhouse with my father until I grew up and moved out. We always had extra rooms not being used, and because of the age of the house, plus all this extra space, there was always a sort of eeriness.
Are you serious right now?
If I had to get a drink in the middle of the night, I looked at the ground the whole time because I was scared of what might be looking back at me in dark corners, rooms, and hallways. Even the windows and mirrors were avoided because I wasn't sure what I'd see looking back at me. When I was around 12 years old, I questioned why the
You have
room
got
that
to be
used
kidding me.
my nursery was
You have got to be
locked from
fucking
the
kidding me.
outside.
You have got to be
I
kidding
didn't
me.
think it was weird before then. My dad needed a room for storage, and I figured he just wanted to keep me out. I brought it up to him one day, asking what's so important in there that he needs to keep me out, even though I'm not a child anymore. It was a typical 12-year-old mentality I had. Turns out, I was not entirely correct about the lock.
Oh, screw you and
My
screw your
dad,
fucking,
with a very
you know.
serious demeanor, sat me down and answered my inquiry. When I was a baby, around 1 to 2 years old, I slept in this nursery room on the 2nd floor next to my dad's room. This room was painted by my sister, especially for me, with Winnie the Pooh characters and fluffy clouds, the type of thing I think back on and appreciate. The effort and creativity was so admirable.
Always the same dumb
I had
shit.
a photo of me smiling at Pooh Bear on the wall while we were setting it up, but I'm not the most tech-savvy to figure out how to link this photo. But anyway, I was in this nursery in my crib, again right next to my dad's room, the perfect age to be on my own. Every night, though, my dad was woken up by me sort of scream-crying. He had raised 4 children before me, so he was not making first-time parent mistakes that would otherwise be in question. He thought it was probably the switch to being in my room rather than being in his room that caused my nightly discomfort. He considered bringing my crib back into his room, but of course the nursery was all ready to go. I had just graduated. For a while, when I cried in terror, he would come in and check on me, only to find that nothing was wrong in the sense of present stressors like
Everything is Fine is a new webcomic series on Webtoon. This series is not for the faint of heart. It may look all cute and adorable at first.
Hey, this story is just one part of the Stories with Sapphire podcast. If you want to hear the full episode in its intended context, link is in the description below. It's story time. The One. The Name of Flawless by Jason. Hey Sapphire, I just watched some of your videos about dreams and I actually have a story of my own. I've known that I was sensitive since the age of 9. One time I woke up in the middle of the night and saw what I can only describe as 2 cloudy figures, a man and a woman, dancing in a
Who the hell lands here? Oh my god.
But one of my most intense experiences
Jesus Christ.
was when I was about 14, before I
Nope.
transitioned.
Still can't go there.
I had my very first predictive dream. I wasn't the only one with this gift in my family. My grandmother and father also had these dreams. The dreams were normally very symbolic, like my father would dream about snakes lurking around the house and biting him, which, according to my grandmother, meant that someone was going to betray him. My own dream was about my paternal grandmother. It happened in the middle of the week, just after she had mentioned that she
What the hell are you
my
so...
uncle Ruan and his girlfriend to the school dance on Saturday. I went to sleep that night and had a dream that felt so real and was so disturbing that I ran to my father afterwards. So the dream begins on the Saturday night of the dance, and we were all having a party in my grandmother's house.
I love
Me,
UFOs
my
so much.
dad, my stepmother, and my younger brother were in the living room watching TV. My father's Uncle Jan, his wife, and his 3 daughters with all their kids were there too. The kids, as what was normal behavior of them, were playing in my grandmother's room. They were jumping on the beds and running around, behavior that irritated my father.
I love
My father
UFOs.
looked at me and told me to go tell the kids to play more calmly. I went to go tell them to calm down and stop jumping around on Grandma's bed. And just as I was doing that, the phone rang. I answered the phone with a simple hello, and an unknown but calm voice spoke without a greeting. Your grandmother is now part of the group by the name of Flawless. I didn't know what that was supposed to mean. They kept asking the voice to tell me the name and explain what they were talking about, but they just hung up.
Why does this weird shit always happen to
Something
me?
about the call was very
Like,
odd.
look at him.
Then I found
Stupid
myself in my
bitch.
school.
Oh my
in
God.
homeroom class. There was a ring again. The teacher's cell phone. She called me to her desk and handed me the phone. The same voice spoke, but its tone was more urgent. Your grandmother is now part of the group by the name of Flawless. It sent a shiver down my spine. The group by the name of Flawless? What did they mean by that? I woke up bolting out of bed, covered in sweat, and ran to my
Gotta be
father's
kidding me.
room, not even knocking on the door, tears streaming down my face. Second. Dad, call Grandma. Dad, call Grandma. Dad, call Grandma. I have to tell her something. I shook him by the shoulders, and it was as if my fear was passing into him as well. He called her, and I took the phone from his hand. Grandma, Saturday, be careful. It was all I got out. I couldn't get any more sleep after that. Saturday came. I was on edge the entire day. I knew something was going to happen, but I didn't know what. Later that night, my grandmother left to drop off my uncle and his girlfriend at the school dance. I reminded her to be careful. About an hour later, we received a call. It was my grandmother. She told us that on her way back from dropping them off, a truck ran a red light and crashed right into a pole. The driver died on the scene. Because of my warning, she was extra vigilant that night, driving much slower than usual and avoiding back roads. If she hadn't been paying close attention, her car would have been sandwiched between the truck and the pole. It was then that it hit me. Flawless. Angels are flawless. I believe that some higher being was trying to warn me. Maybe it was an angel, because it felt like it was coming from something very pure. To this day, my grandmother believes that if I hadn't called her in the middle of the night with my message, she would have died.
What the hell? Look at him. What a weirdo.
I've heard of similar stories like this,
Man, I'm
where a
about to beat the
warning in a
dookie out of this
dream
dude.
ends up saving someone's life. And it's stories like these that make me reconfigure what I know about time and destiny. Was his grandmother in that accident, but she managed to change course? Or was she always meant to narrowly avoid death? If intervention was going to happen at all, why was she spared and not the truck driver? Jason believes that his ability was passed down to him by his ancestors, and they are watching him and his family very closely. Perhaps it's as simple as noticing when you are receiving a warning. If Jason had ignored the dream and not called his grandma, things might have ended differently. How many times in our lives do we have a hunch we ignore, only to later kick ourselves for not listening to it? Our dreams...
Oh, don't run away now. Wasn't you having so much fun trying to kill me?
We just haven't been paying attention. Thank you for joining me today. If you like what you heard and would like to support this independently run show, consider becoming a member of my Patreon. Visit patreon.com/storieswithsapphire to see the different tiers and perks. If you'd like to submit a story, email me at storieswithsapphire@gmail.com. Salamat. Good night. Hey believers and non-believers, before we begin this week's episode, I want to tell you about a podcast that I know you'll love. My friend Chelsea Weber-Smith is the brilliant host of American Hysteria. It's a scripted podcast about moral panics, conspiracy theories, and fantastical thinking, and explores our nation's history through the lens of the false things we fear and the outrageous things we often believe. Seriously, there couldn't be a more timely show than this.
Car, please.
When are we not
Car, please.
overstepping in this country, right? Chelsea uses exhaustive research, sociological analysis, personal stories, and dark humor to explain what informs our collective panics. Things like stranger danger, the war on drugs, poison Halloween candy, and one of my personal favorite episodes, Talking to the Dead. And they have a fantastic two-part analysis on the satanic panic that you definitely don't want to miss. Chelsea is a charming treasure of a human being.
Who the hell?
You'll love this show.
Man.
All of season 1 and 2, and season 3 is already out. Subscribe now wherever you get your podcasts. That's American Hysteria. Hello, believers, non-believers, and everyone in between. You're listening to Stories with Sapphire. I am Sapphire Cavallo. Now get cozy and open your mind, because it's story time. Welcome to the first season of my new show, where I'll be sharing a multicultural perspective on the supernatural. After the show, you feel compelled story, need paranormal advice, or want to share interesting paranormal news, send an email to storieswithsapphire@gmail.com. This is an independently run podcast. If you like what you hear and would like to consider becoming a patron, visit patreon.com/storieswithsapphire to see the different tiers of perks, such as a tarot.
Yeah, you don't miss, do you?
Have you ever felt like you were cursed? Where does this misfortune actually come from? Is it inflicted upon us from a higher being, or from our fellow humans? In this week's episode, I'll be discussing black magic and curses. First, I'll share a story from a young woman who was cursed on Siquijor Island. Then, we'll speak with Lynn Pacificar, a Filipino shaman who successfully invoked an entity to carry out a hex. And finally, I'll speak with Michelle Davis, whose family was followed by the Hat Man for years.
Leave me alone, Jesus.
Chapter
Oh, nope. Get me back in, please. Thank you.
It wasn't until last year that I learned of Siquijor, an island in the Philippines south of Cebu, where my family is from. I've been to the Philippines numerous times, but was surprised that I had never heard of this place, because it is 100% my brand, an island where witchcraft and natural healing practices prevail. There's a mixed reaction among Filipinos regarding the island. Some think the rituals and practices are nothing more than an entertaining ruse to swindle tourists out of their money. But there are still some who are terrified of the island and stay away at all costs. The following true story from Sam will have you either running from or running to this island. Sikihor has a reputation of being an island of witchcraft and sorcery, but I didn't think much of this when I booked my trip there. I focused on the blue waters, stunning sunsets, and waterfalls that I kept seeing on Instagram. In my mind, the witches of Sikihor were a thing of the past, like way back in the 17th century. I had no idea they still somehow existed in our day and age. Unfortunately, I learned this the hard way. My experience in Sikihor is absolutely mad, and you may think I'm insane. I've been debating with myself for the past 8 months about whether or not I should share it, but here goes. My boyfriend and I arrived in Sikihor on a Saturday afternoon and spent the day at our hotel, Blue Wave Inn. Don't go there. We rented a scooter for the following day and rode to Salagdong Beach. It was a long weekend, so there were a lot of Filipinos on the beach participating in their favorite activities, karaoke and eating. After about an hour, I started to feel unwell. I suddenly had a high fever. We managed to get back to the hotel, where I spent the rest of the day sleeping. I kept taking paracetamol and ibuprofen to get the fever down, but nothing was working. My boyfriend was very worried and wanted me to see a doctor. He brought me to the ER at a provincial hospital.
Of course! Of fucking course!
Monday. The nurses told us to come back the following day.
Screw you.
I got even sicker during the night with severe diarrhea and woke up very weak.
Yeah, I can tell you're so damn desperate.
We returned to the hospital and were finally able to see a doctor. She wanted to hospitalize me, but I refused. If you had seen the hospital, there was blood on the floor, patients in beds in the hallway, children with bad injuries getting stitches in front of everyone. I just needed medication and would rest at our hotel. We went to the hospital pharmacy to get medication and a container for a stool exam, which is when I fainted in the hallway. My boyfriend brought me to the ER where the doctor put me on drips. I had to stay there for a few hours until the fever finally broke and I passed the stool, which was tested and showed that I had amoeba. The doctor prescribed a 5-day treatment and said I would start to feel better within 48 hours. I returned to the hotel and rested for the next few days. My Filipina mom lives in Manila and came over to Sikihor. After 5 days of treatment, I was still very sick with severe diarrhea and was feeling extremely weak and nauseous. We moved on to Bohol as planned, where 2 of my mom's best friends, Ray and Benji, joined us. I was having an extremely hard time eating because of the nausea. I spent my days sleeping and on the toilets. We decided to go see another doctor in Bohol. She sent me to the ER and immediately put me on drip. Indeed, I was severely dehydrated and it was becoming quite dangerous. I was hospitalized for 2 nights and did more exams, but nothing showed I had amoeba. In fact, nothing was coming up in the results. I had some bacteria in my stool, but otherwise, nothing that could explain why I was still this unwell. After 4 bottles of IV fluids, not to mention the 1.5 liters a day I was also drinking, and over a week of medication, I was still very sick and having diarrhea about 3 to 4 times a day. I had no appetite and could not eat, even though I was perfectly conscious that I had to just force myself because I had lost a lot of weight in only a matter of days and I was extremely weak. I would cry in front of my plate,
oh my
and
God,
it would take me over an hour to gulp down 5 spoons of rice. Ray, my mom's friend, was worried because he knew about Sikihor's reputation with witches. He had heard that bad things happen there, and a lot of Filipinos are actually afraid to go to Sikihor because it is apparently full of bad spirits. Ray suggested I see an arbolario, a faith healer or witch doctor. My mom and I both laughed it off at first. We are not superstitious and don't believe in that kind of stuff. But since I wasn't getting any better, There
was no reason for you to calm down here. Absolutely none.
Unfortunately, since I was hooked to an IV, I could not leave the hospital. So Ray brought the dress I was wearing to the Arbolario, who was able to practice his magic and see what happened. The Arbolario said I had 2 bullet marks in me, 2 curses. One from an evil fairy who fancied me, and the second from a human being I had actually spoken to in person, and who apparently was envious of my beauty. That made me eye roll. Now, this is where you may think I'm crazy, but the day I got sick at the beach, a Filipina came up to me, touched my shoulder, and asked if I would take a photo.
Oh, it's that damn guy that shot at me.
Thinking she wanted me to take a photo of her, I said yes, and was just wiping my hands dry before grabbing her phone when she sat next to me and took a selfie with me. When I asked her why she was doing this, she simply said, nothing, and walked off. My high fever started about 30 minutes after that encounter. And then, the day we arrived in Siquijor, one of my fingers randomly turned blue. The hotel manager where we stayed said that some guests the previous week got sick like me, and a part of their leg turned blue. When I returned to Manila, I was speaking to a lot of my mom's Filipino friends and realized they all had a story about fairies, witches, and dwarves, and were also healed by an Arbolario. One of them had a similar story to mine, where her foot had turned blue, and an Arbolario healed her.
Come on out,
So
pal.
the Arbolario asked these 2 beings to lift the curses they had put on me. They agreed, but they wanted an offering in exchange. The fairy asked for a black hen, whereas the human being asked for 5 days of prayer. It took my mom's friends about a day and a half to find a black hen. Apparently, these are very rare. I didn't know when the hen was sacrificed, but on my last day in Bohol, I woke up and was starving. My appetite had returned with a vengeance, and my stools were getting better. An hour after my appetite came back, Ray called us to say that the hen had been sacrificed. It coincided with when I suddenly felt like eating again. It took me another full week and another checkup trip to a very good hospital in Manila to feel completely better, as my body had been through quite a lot.
Of course.
So, do you think I got cursed? Or do you think it was a medical issue that was not found? Or something else entirely? The weird thing is, as soon as the doctor in Bohol had heard that I had just arrived from Siquijor, she refused to touch me. My mom blatantly asked her, as well as the nurse that was taking care of me, if, as doctors, and therefore scientific-minded people, they believed in witches and all these stories coming out of Siquijor. Neither one of them would give her a straight answer, and judging by the way they were acting, it was quite clear they thought I had been cursed. I have seen a lot of people on Instagram go to Siquijor and were totally fine, so maybe I just got unlucky. I have also heard some people say that tourists in Siquijor get poisoned. For example, a waitress could put poison under her nails and slip it in your food. Then, when they see you're sick, they tell you they know a healer and will bring you to them, and you'll have to pay for that. If this is what actually happened to me, then the only place I ate at was our hotel, the Blue Wave Inn, which is why I would not recommend going there. If you do decide to go to Siquijor, just be extremely careful and stay at very good hotels, even if it means it costs more. There's no price for staying safe and healthy. And if someone touches you, the saying is to touch back, cancel a spell or illness. I did not do this to the woman at the beach who touched me. Arbolario also said that powers were handed down from generation to generation. He got his good powers from his mother, who was previously a healer. He explained that some people hand down bad powers to their children who don't necessarily want to hurt people, but if they don't, then they're the ones that get cursed themselves. On a scale of 1 to 10, how insane do you think I am? Do you believe in this? I know I didn't, until it happened to me. travel and photography blog, mindfulwanderland.com. Chapter 2. Don't mess with me.
Okay, wait. Okay, so this is what happened. We had a tenant in our back house.
This is Lynn Pacificar, Filipino shaman. If you haven't listened to last week's episode, make sure you do after this to learn more about Lynn and her work.
We what do you call it? It's like it's a conversion studio. Yeah, we converted one part of the garage. So that's where he lived, and then Gilbert worked on the other side.
Gilbert is Lynn's husband.
He wasn't paying the rent. He wasn't leaving. We would serve him notices, and he was just not receiving. He was not listening. As a matter of fact, he was really abusive to our place. And so being that person, that spiritual, magical person I am, I conducted a type of ritual that involved a puppet or a doll, and I invoked a spirit to help me get rid of this person from my home. It was just no longer a happy with that energy living around us. So Gilbert was in the garage one night, and he heard footsteps on the roof of the garage, like heavy footsteps. And it was like boom, boom, boom. And then it stopped at a certain point. And he was like, oh my gosh, I have to tell Lynn. And he sneaks out quietly from the garage to get to me and says, come here, there's somebody on the roof. And I ended up getting one of our samurai swords, and my other cousin who lived with us at the time got something. We all just got something to hit someone with because we don't know who's on the roof. We go out and you can't see anybody, it's dark, but you see movement in our big rubber tree. It was a huge tree, and you'll see the leaves moving as if somebody was there. I went around the back and I climbed to see what was there, and then Gilbert was spraying the roof with water, and when he was spraying the roof with water, it would move. And so I wanted to make sure it was like not anyone that there, because who would be able to do this, like come onto our property? Anyway, long story short, no one was there on the roof. I jumped back down, met Gilbert on the other side of the garage, and we were like, could it be that tenant? Like,
how do you say babies in Spanish? I think you mean bebés. Not to be confused with my non-existent puebes.
It's just a cigarette and it cannot be that bad.
Honey, don't you love me and you know it makes me sad.
It's just a cigarette like you always used to do.
I was different then, I don't need them to be cool.
Everybody keep your hands and feet inside at all times. And please...
Your mic is echoing.
Hello?
Yes.
What's up?
Oh my god. I could just find a shotgun, that'd be cool. What an idiot. He literally stood there and let you break his wall. You gotta be kidding me. Where? Oh. Oh. Unless you wanted that, I'm gonna trade this blue pump then. There's another one. Okay. I'm gonna drop these if you want to carry those. Eliminate a fish guy. Okay. Fine. Why are you joining my party? I know it's public, but I don't think I know you, dude. Hang on one quick minute. Hello. Alright then. Why join and then not say anything? What is wrong with you? Go join somebody else. I don't know you. Oh, did you want to go for that cosmic chest? Yeah, okay, fine. He's already dead. Okay.
If you're hearing this recorded message, that means we're getting close to it.
Wait, what?
If everything works like I think it should,
Oh.
that another 6 days of ominous hovering are numbered.
Is that them? carrying the boat. Ooh, junk. Well.
Make sure your seatbelt is tightly fastened. Thank you, everyone, and have a fun, safe ride. Except for you, bro. Yeah, you, in the front? Yeah, you thought you was brave and all, right? Sitting in the front? Yeah, that seatbelt is broken, bro. You're gonna die. You're gonna die today, bro. In 3, 2, 1...
Mozart didn't like this one singer so much that he wrote her a piece with a lot of high notes and low notes constantly, because he noticed whenever she did low notes, her chin would go to her chest, and when she did high notes, her head would fly up, and so when she sang this piece, her head was just... Eric the Red wanted people to live on his newfound ice-covered land, so he named it Greenland. In 1957, a British newscaster told his audience that the Italians had like a huge spaghetti harvest that year. And then they cut cameras and showed people like picking spaghetti off of trees and bushes. And apparently the British didn't know shit about spaghetti at this time because a lot of people called in asking how they can grow their own spaghetti trees. Mozart didn't like this one singer so much.
Kurt realized if he removed the safety screen, he could easily fit the film in underneath. So he did that, and he told himself that he would just replace the safety screen as soon as he was done. Fast forward a few months to April 19th, 2000. And Kurt needed to move some grain from one bin to another. So he fired up the auger that still did not have the safety screen on the outside of it. And as he was walking right near the entrance to the auger, he tripped and he fell feet first into the opening of the auger. And right away, his left foot got sucked up into the rotating metal screw. And before he'd even fallen back onto the ground, he could tell his left foot had been cut clean off. But that wasn't the worst of it, because the rest of his leg was still getting pulled into the shaft. Kurt realized he had his pocket knife. He pulled it out, it was a 4-inch blade, and he realized he could cut his leg off. But he had to time it right. And so he watched the rotating screw until he could clearly see a break in his leg, and he timed it so he reached down and cut through his leg as fast as he could right before the rotation of the auger caught up again. Kurt realized if he removed the safety screen, he could easily fit the film.
No duos, no thank you, no thank you.
Replace the safety screen as soon as he was done. Fast forward a few months to April 19th, 2019.
It's just a cigarette and it cannot be that bad.
Honey, don't you love me and you know it makes me sad.
It's just a cigarette like you always used to do.
I was different then, I don't need them to be cool.
Lil Nas X is expecting a baby and a lot of people are not happy with it. Welcome back to the Pop Culture /T-Side of TikTok. It's King Asante and let's talk. 911. Lil Nas X is expecting a baby and a lot of people are not happy. 911. Hello, I think my friend just died. Okay, I understand. First things first, make sure he's dead, okay? Okay, I got it. Okay, now what? What the fuck? 911.
Dogs have changed a lot in the past 100 years.
They launched an air raid on the island.
It's just a cigarette and it cannot be that bad.
You know it makes me sad.
It's just a cigarette like you always used to do.
I was different then, I don't need them to be cool.
It's
Oh,
just a
shit. Hold up.
cigarette and it
Hold that
cannot
one.
be
Hold
that
that one.
bad.
Hold that one. Hold that one. Okay, I'm back, I guess. Actually, nah. Screw this. I'm going to go eat. I'll catch y'all later.